Thank you all for being here today, and thank you again for having me here. It's very nice to be here, and now I think probably one of several trips that I've made to Israel, and I always enjoy coming. So as was mentioned, I am PRNewswire's Global Director of Emerging Media. Basically what that means is that I'm the chief geek outside of the IT department. So what we're going to be talking about today, is a bit about content marketing and how PRNewswire fits into this realm of content marketing. Is that PRNewswire now being around for 60 plus years, we have been one of the global leaders of really helping companies and organizations to communicate their message. But in reality, it's about having the ability to amplify the content that you're creating content that easily engages your audiences, and making that content that you're creating easily visible to those audiences. So as we look towards everything, we see that ideas about content marketing that are really, have been sweeping the United States over the last 2 years, and more being talked about internationally. And it's about being that idea that we can now today create content, high quality content that is really specific to the audiences that we are trying to reach. And the idea that we can now take this information, raise that awareness, and if we think about that idea of that, that funnel, if we think in marketing terms, and we think about that funnel coming down of raising awareness today, really raising that interest, creating that desire for whatever that product or service is that we're discussing, and now getting people to take an action. And that's what it's really coming down to, is that ability to today get that information down to somebody so they can act upon it. So as we look at this idea with the content being at the center of it, and as we look to engage those opportunities, well, today we're utilizing many channels to reach those audiences. And those audiences as well are splintering depending on the type of company or organization that you might be working with. Say it's a B2B company or a B2C company, or even selling to governments. As we're taking this content, our audiences are also utilizing all of these different channels just as much as the regular consumer is today. So as we look at this, we see this emerging media landscape shifting. And we see user-generated to editorial, consumer to business-related content. And what we're starting to see is this real shift that's taking place. But the fact of the matter is, if this media landscape is no longer static, then we cannot afford to be static too in how we utilize that media landscape to market our messages. How do we get that messages out to those different audiences that are filtering into many different places on that media landscape? And if we go back into the 1960s, it was really easy to reach a wide swath of people by just buying a 30-second television spot. But today, it would take approximately 117 primetime commercials to reach that same audience today. And now, I don't know about any of you, but I don't have the budget for that. Do you? I don't think so. So, as we look at how we reach that audience and how much more difficult it has become to reach those audiences, well, the ad is yesterday, and content is now the future, and how we utilize content to reach our different audiences. And so if we're thinking about that shift that's happening, well, we think about that traditional marketing funnel, right? How many of you have seen an image like this before? That traditional marketing funnel might be in textbooks or so. But we think about that traditional marketing funnel, but the fact of the matter is that this has always been about getting that desired person to take that path down to where they become a buyer, where they purchase a product. But the problem is that today's modern marketing funnel doesn't look like this anymore. Today, that modern marketing funnel looks a little bit more like this. A lot of different points of entry, but also not a very clear outcome as to where you want someone to go. And think about this. If you read an advertisement, did you know what action you were supposed to take after you read it? If you read a press release today, do you always know what action you're supposed to take next? And as somebody who distributes lots of press releases, and I have to read a lot of them, I can tell you it is very rarely very clear what the company or organization wants somebody to do next after they've read that information. So today, as more and more companies and organizations are now going and reaching directly to consumers, you really have to take a step back and ask yourself, is it very clear after somebody reads this piece of information that I've spent hours writing, is it very clear what they're supposed to do next? And don't just think about that in the relations of a press release, but what about a blog post? How about a tweet? A Facebook post? Any way that you're doing it, are you really creating actionable content today? So as we look at this idea of creating desired outcomes, how those outcomes can be achieved, well, we see lots of different ways that, we want those desired outcomes to happen. Well, we can achieve that through content creation, good syndication strategies, good campaigns, and measuring that information to make sure that we're being effective. But how we see this happening is today we're seeing this convergence today of paid, earned, and owned media. And this isn't just happening in the United States, it's happening all over the world right now, where we're seeing this collision course taking place. And we're seeing that paid media, where we've always paid to have our content, is really smashing up against our earned media and our owned media. And what's happening with social and mobile is that today we're creating ideas around owned media and earned media without ever having to utilize paid portions. We're creating campaigns that combine earned plus owned plus paid. How do we do this? And how do we take earned media today? That definition is also vastly changing. In the past, earned media would be a journalist taking that story, picking up and writing that, and that would then create earned media. But today, earned media can easily be created by a blog post from a company or organization that gets shared on Facebook by a follower that has 600 friends, 600 other followers. We're seeing that tweets today can reach more people sometimes than whole publications. So the idea of what is earned media is really shifting and changing. And the idea that we can now utilize owned media channels to create earned media opportunities without ever having to utilize paid sometimes is a very empowering piece for marketing and public relations professionals. So as we look at this happening, we see that we can complement paid media with content, and that we can add that content as with those snippets of advertisements that we're creating, but we can utilize that to add and send people directly to owned media or to earned media. We can, as well as utilize our own content infrastructure that we have to create our own earned media opportunities. So we're seeing a real shift in the landscape that is taking place. So as we look to this to happen, what we see is that syndication becomes a really good way for us to take and amplify that owned media that we have. Because as the saying sometimes goes, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around, does it make a sound? Well, if you post a blog post, will Google instantly find it? The answer is no. So we look at syndication and ways that take that content to push that content out as a way to amplify those messages and make that owned media now more visible. So as we take this information, we look to take the reasons why companies are doing this. And we see that 61% of consumers have said that they feel better about a company that just delivers customized content. We're seeing that interesting content is one of the top three reasons people follow brands. We see all of these different stats and figures that tell us why companies and organizations are now investing a lot more time, effort, money in creating customized content and creating content that can then more easily reach those different audiences that they're trying to reach directly. So one of the things that we've also found is that content that moves today is really power online. And people who can move content are really powerful online. So we think how many of you are on Twitter? People on Twitter? You tweet? Okay. How many of you have heard of clout? Okay, so we've heard of clout scores. Now, what is clout supposed to measure? Any? The idea is that clout measures influence, right? So if somebody has a higher clout score, then they must be that more influential. But in reality, what often happens is that, in my opinion, clout doesn't really measure influence. What clout really measures, and it says, is how people can, it says that this person with a high clout score can actually move content. And so for getting somebody who has a clout score in the 60s, 70s, 80s to retweet my message, that many more people are going to see it because that person is now influenced. That person knows how to move content online. And that's really what it measures. Because a lot of people with high clout scores are not very influential people when you meet them in real life. However, they know how to move content online. And we think about our own companies and our own organizations that are now creating our own social profiles. Do your social profiles really move content online? Or do you really need to find out who can help you move that content? So as we see this, there's three main principles of communicating a message today, in my opinion. The first is that we need to make our content as accessible as possible. We need to make that content as easy to view, not dependent on device, as possible. And we need to make that content as easy to use as possible. Because in the end of the day, we could be creating content, but if nobody can access it, they can't easily view that content, and they can't use that content, then what's the purpose of spending the time to create the content in the first place? So as we look at this, search now becomes an ever-increasing important thing. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about search because if your content can't be found, then nobody will find it. If Google can't find it, then nobody else is going to find it either. So search becomes a very important thing. So when was the last time you performed a search like this? I'm not sure even the students here at the university go to the library and search like this anymore. But how many searches do you perform in a day? How many of you think you perform more than 50 searches a day online? More than 100? Okay? Still some hands. Well, how about like this? How many of you are performing searches via your mobile devices every day? So what we've been trained to do today is when we have a question, Google is where we go to get the answer. And so what we're seeing today, this is a very important number, 17.9 billion. That's how many searches were done in 1 month, in the month of July this year, in the United States. 17.9 billion core searches. Well, that's a lot of searches, right? Now, how many of you are on Facebook? All right. Now, how many people are on Facebook worldwide? How many people are on Facebook worldwide? About 1 billion. 1 billion. So there's 1 billion people on Facebook worldwide, but 1 billion people on Facebook worldwide, but in 1 month, there were 17.9 billion core searches performed just in the United States. Now, I'm sorry to say I was searching and searching and searching to try and find the answer to how many searches are performed on a monthly basis in Israel, but unfortunately I could not find that information. Maybe not 17.9 billion, but probably at least 1 billion. But here's the fact. Here's the thing, is that at the end of the day, this many searches are being done. Well, that means we need to make sure that we are giving people the easy answer to their questions. So what we look at with search today is a couple of things. First, very few people ever go past the first page of search. Second is that, about 33% are clicking on the very first search result. But the most important thing on this, in my opinion, is that 39%, almost 40% of search users today are linking search ranking to company prominence. They're linking that search ranking, how much of your content is filling that first page of search, starts to impact how they feel about your company, your organization, your brand. Now, maybe you don't work for a B2C company. That's fine. You work for a B2B company. So let's say that you're a medical device manufacturer. Okay? Well, who's going and doing the search for your product? Either the patient or the doctor. And who's going to impact your sales? Probably the doctor. So Can the doctor easily find your content in the first page of search if they're not utilizing your brand name or your product name, but they're just looking for the answer to what your product does? And so this is the impactfulness of search today. And so what search really does for us is it tells us where we should go today. And it leads those breadcrumbs. And those breadcrumbs are your pieces of content that is directing people to where they're supposed to go next. So as we look at this, this idea, this sphere of influence that's happening around people of what impacts somebody to make a decision. Well, the idea today is with all of social media and with online media and emerging media, as we see towards mobile devices and such, all these different things that impact that decision, well, we're hoping that it's going to lead into that sales funnel, right? But in order to do so, we need to create authority. And it really only happens if we start that conversation organically. And that means making sure that our owned media can be amplified enough to become earned media, so it shows up organically in that first page of search results. So as we look at this today, we build our audiences online through content. We know that. But now we've got to get them to do something. And so today, a new equation to throw at you, but EC equals MC. Today, every company is a media company. Today, we have all the same abilities. The idea of needing to own a printing press, you don't have that anymore. All you need to do is have an internet connection and a little bit of know-how. But the better you know how to create content, the better it's going to be, and the better the outcome. And so here's the question. Are you creating your content? Is it like a jockey in a slow turtle race? Or are you slapping a jetpack on it and syndicating that content so it's not just stuck on your own site, but that it's really getting out there to where your audiences will be looking for it? And so if we're taking and thinking about those different things, we need to stream our content into multiple formats. And we need to start thinking about how we do so with utilizing different aspects of multimedia. And the reason why is that it is very well known that even on a Facebook page, how many of you, does anybody here work on a brand page on Facebook? Now, one of the things that Facebook has done a study of on brand pages is that you get 70% more engagement when you utilize multimedia with your posts. If you utilize an image or you utilize video, you're going to get more engagement. Well, that rings true across any stream of content today. When you utilize multimedia, you get more views. You get more engagement. But what we need our content to do is, of course, direct people where to go. So we need to create proactive messaging. We need to create messaging that is with optimization in mind and that really is directional in nature, that is driving people to what they're supposed to go to next. Answering that question, what should I do next? And so as we look at it, a quick little story. So ComScore, they have a great blog. And one of their blog posts that they did this past year, they focused this blog post. It was a very, this was their, the press release that was announcing some information. And so they did this press release, 64% of UK online video audience exposed to video ads in January. Nice, innocuous press release. But it's the official word. It's the first thing that's going out where they're saying, here's the announcement. Now what's next? They go to Twitter, they go to Facebook a week later, they utilize their blog channel to now humanize that message a little bit more, but what they're doing is still linking that content back to the original press release because that is the official word. And so what they're doing is driving people back to that official word, which then drove people to go to a specific product that told them how they got those numbers. So they're making their content directional in nature. And here's the thing is, companies and organizations have been able to do this for a long time, to connect their content and utilize their different social media channels to do this. But one of the things that we need to do is make that content like an easy bake oven, making that content very easy for people to use. So if we make it easy enough, then it's that we're lowering the barrier so that people can easily go and pass that information on. But what we're seeing today is that more multimedia, as I said, equals more views. And we did a study, this is the second year in a row that PRNewswire has done this study, We looked at over 24,000 pieces of content. And in that, what we found is that every time you add just a little bit of multimedia to the content that you're syndicating, you get more views. And in fact, you almost 10 times more views with multiple pieces of multimedia than with a text-only release. In fact, one of the other things that we found is that you also get, on average, increased engagement by about 35%. But where we see all of this coming today is that we can build authority online through good content, that's content within context, that also allows itself to easily be curated. And one of the organizations that I'm going to talk about that is really doing this to an amazing effect is right here in Israel. So, quick little story, and I think some of you may be familiar with this story. But, you know, one of the problems that we've seen, at least in the West, is that it's been, in the past, Israel hasn't been very good at telling their own story. Right? But over the last 2 years, that's changed. And I'll show you why. The Israeli Defense Forces. Now, in the recent conflict that just happened, the Israeli Defense Forces did better job on social media telling their story and getting media to pay attention than anything else that was happening. And in fact, they're utilizing multiple channels to do so and to tell this story. And they're utilizing content to do it. So in fact, I would say the Israeli Defense Forces have become one of the best content marketers around. In fact, what we're seeing is the use of content to push that content through all the multiple channels that they're utilizing easily is creating this content and easily telling this story. Now, what I often hear from companies and organizations is, well, we're scared of social media. What if somebody talks back to us? What do we do? Or what if somebody says something negative? And the interesting thing, what I've found, both in the US and here, is that usually some of the best people at utilizing social media to tell their stories have actually been the military. The United States Air Force, the United States Army, the Israeli Defense Forces, all utilize social media extremely well to take that content that they're creating to tell the story. But the IDF has taken it a step above by really taking and pushing that content out far and wide and doing it in a number of different ways. So on Twitter, as we're seeing things being live tweeted, we're seeing that information coming up. And even when the opposition talks against, that's okay because we'll respond. And so now it's become the war of words. And so one of the things that we're seeing as well, and utilizing all these different things, well, if we think about CRM and how companies and organizations need to drive people to take an action, well, they're doing this exact thing by having people's online, driving people to subscribe, because one of the things that they know is the action that they want is they want more people to get their message so they have more people to retell their message. And as we look at this, we see the IDF blog, which does better for search than just about any other form of online media. But their IDF blog, and utilizing that blog to not just put out blog messages and blog posts about what's happening, but also to create content that is easy to embed and pass on to others. And so one of the things that we start to see is now how we utilize more and newer pieces of media, like Tumblr, which has in fact been the really perfect marriage of Twitter and blogs. And the IDF has already been up on Tumblr for quite some time, where most companies and organizations out there are still asking, what's Tumblr? So what we're starting to see is that all of this content then generates good media. All of this content of constantly pushing out our content now creates better and more earned media opportunities. So the key takeaways that I want to leave you with today is, one, think about that convergence of paid, owned, and earned, and how you can take advantage of the convergence. Two, know that today you have to syndicate your message. And you have to syndicate it, and there's lots of different ways to syndicate your message. But if nobody has the opportunity to know that your message has been updated, then they're not going to actively come to seek out a new message. And three, conversation. We need to start conversations organically around our products, around our brands, around the messages that we're saying. And one final equation I want to throw at you. T equals R plus D. Trust today, which is one of the most important assets that any company, organization, or person can have, is about reliability and delight. Publishing a steady stream of content and keeping it relevant and keeping it interesting. So thank you very much.